What if I told you there's a lot more to wars than just fighting wars? History teaches us many wars have been won not only through soldiers nor by weapons, but also by psychological warfare and decimating the enemy's financial fortress. Adolf Hitler knew that, and he had a strategy to defeat his enemies by using gold to ensure that the big players would not get involved in World War II. In our world's history of war, many countries and cultures went into huge debt to fight wars. The truth is, money ultimately decides who wins wars and battles. If you don't have the money, you have a far better chance of losing the fight than winning it. Adolf Hitler was fully aware of this fact, which is why he sought to prevent the United States and other major nations from joining World War II. The United States had an impressive military that was stocked with assets, including personnel, vessels, weapons, armored vehicles, and missiles. Hitler obviously feared losing the war and having his plans foiled if the United States got involved. That's what this story is all about. Hitler's gold. After the war was over, stories of real and imagined missing riches began to mingle together, particularly when it came to stolen Nazi gold. Treasure seekers have been on the search for all of the things I'm going to show, and they have found some, and are still looking for the rest. Let's go over some of the mysterious riches and gold stolen by Hitler. Number 10. The largest Nazi treasure hoard ever found. On the morning of April 6, 1945, after assisting their compatriots in the capture of Merkers, central Germany, 2 American troops were out on patrol when they came across 2 ladies. One of them was expecting and was in need of a doctor. She was brought to Private First Class Richard Moots, who was fluent in German, and the ladies told Moots that the German soldiers had hidden treasures in the town's salt mine, and he saw it on the way into town as he accompanied them. A total of 3,682 bags of German currency, 80 bags of foreign currency, 8,307 gold bars, 55 boxes of gold bullion, 3,326 bags of gold coins, 63 bags of silver, 1 bag of platinum bars, 8 bags of gold rings, and 207 containers of other looted items, including valuable artwork, were found in the mine. These were Nazi Germany's internal reserves, which meant the war could be ended sooner, and it did. The Nazis had stolen money and property from all throughout Europe. Much of it had been used to pay for the production of weaponry in neutral nations like Portugal. It's been 74 years since the mine's riches were discovered, but some people still believe there's more Nazi treasure out there somewhere. Number 9. 1,100-year-old Gospel Manuscript. During the war, many American servicemen gave in to temptation and brought priceless artwork back to the States through smuggling routes. Later, in the year 1990, the world was surprised to find that the heir of a fairly unknown war veteran, Joe Meter, had put up for auction the actual treasures of German art, including one of the most priceless and historically important pieces of medieval art from Whitewright, a small town in Texas. It turned out that Meter's treasure also contained a manuscript from 1513, as well as a reliquary from the 10th century. The treasure was taken from the Quedlinburg Church and buried in a mine shaft to be protected by Allied forces. It would seem that Meter, who was a lieutenant at the time, was the one who took the items and brought them to the United States, thus completing one of the most notable thefts of art in the 20th century. Until his death in 1980, Joe Meter kept wrapped in a blanket an invaluable manuscript of the 4 Gospels dating to the 9th century, bound in a fine work of silver and gold. Later, it was auctioned, and it went for a surprisingly high price of $3 million in Switzerland. Number 8. Raphael's Portrait of a Young Man. During World War II, the Nazis took several paintings, but one of the most well-known and historically significant ones is the portrait of a young man by the famous Italian Renaissance painter Raphael. In 1939, Nazi thieves stole artwork from the Prince Czartoryski Museum in Krakow, Poland. The picture was first given to Hans Frank, who was in charge of the Nazi general government in Poland at the time. After making its way to Berlin, Dresden, and Linz during the war, it eventually made its way back to Krakow, where it was displayed in Wawel Castle by Frank. However, the picture was not there at the time when the United States forces detained Frank at the castle. After 75 years, there is still no sign of the missing masterpiece anywhere in the world. Number 7. Rommel's Gold. When Germany occupied Tunisia in 1943, the Nazis reportedly took a large amount of gold that belonged to Jewish people who lived on the island of Jerba. They transported the gold to the island of Corsica, between the shores of France and Italy, but it was lost at sea when it was being transported from Corsica to Germany. The fabled riches are sometimes referred to as Rommel's Gold, after Erwin Rommel, hence the name Rommel's Gold, a Nazi commander who directed campaigns of terror against Jewish people in North Africa. Also, this story has inspired both actual and imagined treasured seekers. 2 divers have lost their lives while hunting for Rommel's treasure in the deep sea. Number 6. SS Minden. Historians and researchers think that one of the 2 things that happened with the Nazi ship SS Minden, first, when it came in contact with the British ship in the North Atlantic off the coast of Iceland in 1939, when it was traveling from Rio de Janeiro to Germany. It is said that the Nazis purposely destroyed their own ship in order to keep the British from discovering its cargo, which was a hoard of gold. What else could it be? In 2017 and 2019, a company based in the United Kingdom attempted to find the sunken ship and its reputed gold stash, and the potential location of the shipwreck has been found thanks to mapping done by the Marine and Freshwater Research Institute. However, no one has been able to find any treasure in the area as of yet. Number 5. The Amber Room. Designed in the 18th century, the wall panels of the Amber Room reached from floor to ceiling and were covered with gold leaf, had an exquisite design, and were embellished with fossilized amber, quasi-stones, and gold leaf. As a show of the alliance between Prussia and Russia against Sweden, the Prussian King Frederick William I gave 3 panels to the Russian Emperor Peter the Great in 1716. Each panel was designed to cover 60 square feet, so they covered a total area of 180 square feet. During the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the Amber Room was in the Catherine Palace in the town of Pushkin, Russia. The Nazis dismantled the chamber and transported its pieces to a museum in a castle located in Königsberg, Germany, as there was German art on it. The Nazis thought it was legally theirs. The city, the castle museum, and most likely the Amber Chamber were all destroyed in 1944 as a result of the Allied bombardment, but hasn't prevented treasure seekers from looking for the room ever since. Number 4. Wrecks of the SS Minden and MV Wilhelm Gustloff. The second theory about the Minden is that it had the Amber Room treasure within. The UK-based company Advanced Marine Services claimed to have discovered 4 tons of gold from South American banks in the post room of the 1939 sunken ship, SS Minden. It was estimated that the gold, worth around £100 million, was on board the ship and was on its way to Germany when the ship was sunk on September 24, 1939, roughly 120 miles southeast of Iceland. It was downed by the men of the ship when they saw the cruisers of the British Navy approaching them. Meanwhile, another theory claims the Nazi gold may be hiding in the wreck of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. When the ship was destroyed by the Soviets, it is possible that a number of gold bars, worth around £100 million, along with portions of the Amber Room, went down with the ship as well. After 9,400 people perished in the shipwreck, the area around the wreck was designated as an international war cemetery, making diving there strictly forbidden within 50 meters. Number 3. Nazi armaments partner Portugal. Despite maintaining its neutrality during World War II, Portugal became one of the leading producers of tungsten, which it then exported to both the Allies and the Axis. The German arms industry was almost exclusively reliant on the supply of tungsten that came from Portugal. When it comes to weaponry, tungsten is an essential element, particularly for the production of armor-piercing bullets and shells. During the war, Portugal was the country that received the second most gold from the Nazis, trailing only Switzerland. In the beginning, trade between the Nazi regime and Portugal was done in hard currency. However, in 1941, the Central Bank of Portugal noticed that a huge chunk of its currency was illegal, and as a result, the leader of Portugal, Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, demanded that all future payments be made in gold. In the year 2000, a French bus driver named Jonathan Diaz discovered records at the Confranc International train station that proved 78 tons of Nazi gold had traveled through the station, giving proof of the indirect involvement of Portugal in the war. Number 2. Vatican Bank. On October 21, 1946, a report labeled Top Secret was sent to the United States Department of State by Treasury Agent Emerson Bigelow. The report was given the name the Bigelow Report. The report indicated that in 1945, the Vatican had received 350 million Swiss francs in Nazi gold for safekeeping, of which 150 million Swiss francs had been impounded by British authorities at the Austrian-Swiss border. The report also mentioned that the gold had been given to the Vatican for safekeeping. The remainder of the gold was reportedly stored in one of the numbered bank accounts that the Vatican maintains in Switzerland. More than 200 million Swiss francs, the majority of which were in the form of gold coins, were ultimately transferred to Vatican City or to the Institute for Works of Religion, also known as the Vatican Bank, with the assistance of the Roman Catholic clergy and the Franciscan order, according to intelligence reports which supported the Bigelow Report. These assertions, on the other hand, have been refuted by the Vatican Bank. Historians claim that the Nazis stole more than $9 billion worth of gold from central banks. Less than half of the gold was actually recovered by the Americans at Merkers. But where did all the other gold go? Is it still in Vatican and Swiss banks? Or is it buried in some remote lake? I guess we'll have to wait for treasure hunters to solve the mystery. Adolf Hitler is considered to be one of the most infamous and disliked individuals in history. The Nazi commander and his henchmen were responsible for millions of killings and the wholesale theft of priceless artworks when they seized power in Germany. But there was another side to him. Adolf Hitler began his career as an artist, yet he eventually climbed to power and became the dictator of Germany and the mastermind of the Holocaust. Historians of the 20th century have long debated how Hitler managed to captivate the German public's imagination and rise to power, given the destruction he left in his wake. As a person, he did not exude any kind of magnetic allure. Many referred to him as an empty vessel outside of his political life. He didn't have many true friends, and an exaggerated opinion of his own intelligence, and didn't have any inborn connections that may have helped him get to the top. The events of Hitler's childhood provide no clues about his later life. His father was a tough and authoritarian Austrian official, and Hitler's upbringing prepared him to follow in his father's footsteps and become a bureaucrat himself. The future dictator's early upbringing was reasonably normal, with the exception of the beatings he received from his father. However, throughout his teens, he grew withdrawn and friendless. He never completed his high school education and relied on his mother for livelihood from 1905 till 1907. Hitler's infamous rejection from art school in 1907 marked the beginning of a period during which he lived in Vienna, where he made grand pronouncements about art, architecture, and culture, but rarely made any serious effort to secure a future in art for himself. Hitler's failure to gain admission to art school was a turning point in his life. The dictator was a failed artist. He was advised by his professors that his talents lay more in the field of building than in painting. If we were to take a look at his paintings, we would be able to see why this is the case. His paintings never include people. Instead, they focus on landscapes and man-made structures. Hitler did not create a whole new and fascinating form of painting. Rather, he drew his inspiration from paintings that belonged to the Greco-Roman classicism, the Italian Renaissance, and the neoclassicism movements. He kept trying to make a livelihood as an artist, painting and selling postcards in Vienna's taverns, but he was never talented enough to be an artist, which was a misfortune for millions of people over the following several decades. Realizing that his painting career had reached a dead end during World War I, Adolf Hitler fled to Munich from Austrian authorities who had learned that he had evaded the country's military service requirements. Hitler, on the other hand, would find his bearings and a foothold on which to launch his political career in the German military. Service in World War II gave Hitler a place in the world for the first time. Many of his fellow soldiers viewed him as a bit of a socially awkward oddball and prude. In the midst of Hitler's recovery from the mustard gas assault, Germany finally conceded defeat in the war while he was resting in a hospital. He went back to his regiment in Munich, and eventually he was offered a position in the information unit, where he worked in the field of military intelligence. It was this job that put him on a collision course with the German Workers' Party. Since the beginning of his career, Adolf Hitler had maintained conservative nationalist ideas, but in a critical development, the army arranged for him to hear right-wing lectures at universities on German history, socialism, and communism. In particular, Hitler ate up the words of a right-wing economist, Gottfried Feder, and a right-wing historian, Karl Alexander von Müller. Müller saw that Hitler had a knack for rhetoric, and as a result of his anecdotes, so he was recommended for a position in the intelligence unit as a spy, tasked with monitoring the German Workers' Party. Hitler became a fiery speaker on the beer hall circuit and was willing to risk the humiliation of low turnout by organizing rallies in large spaces. He rose quickly through the ranks of the party's hierarchy owing to his leadership abilities. In 1920, Hitler and the other leaders of the party changed its name from the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Hitler was elected party chairman in 1921 and immediately assumed complete leadership of the Nazi Party. The once insignificant group started gaining new members and eventually absorbed other right-wing organizations. His political career also led him to prison, where he maintained his icy demeanor. He was not a person who could keep a discussion engaging. When he was not in front of an audience, he was a somewhat uninteresting guy. Yet, something about being in front of an audience flipped a switch in him. He had the ability to milk an audience, mold it, and make it feel things. Hitler's path to power was marred by acts of violence. By 1923, he had reached the point where he felt confident enough to make an effort to violently topple the government of Bavaria, which he anticipated would ultimately lead to the toppling of the government in Berlin, the capital of Germany. Despite the fact that the beer hall putsch was unsuccessful, enormous support was maintained for Hitler's goals. His trial turned into a platform from which he could broadcast his beliefs, and the relatively short time he spent behind bars provided him with the chance to dictate the almost unreadable strategies. When he stood for president in 1932, he had a hard time connecting with people from the middle class. Despite losing the election in 1932, Hitler was able to get the backlog of a large number of significant industrial groups, After the legislative elections in Germany failed to produce a majority administration, the country's president, Paul von Hindenburg, capitulated to pressure from foreign countries and appointed Hitler as chancellor. The role of chancellor in Germany is similar to that of prime minister in other parliamentary systems, and Germany had both a president elected by the people and a chancellor representing the majority party in the government. A year later, the Reichstag building was deliberately burned down, which Hitler used as an excuse to assume emergency powers and imprison his political opponents. He was successful in getting a bill known as the Enabling Act passed by Parliament when the government began rounding up communists and other leftists. The Enabling Act gave Hitler's cabinet the authority to enact laws even without the approval of Parliament. Through his organization, oratory, and public relations, Hitler had become not only the Chancellor of Germany, but a beloved celebrity. The transformation from an artist to a dictator was complete. Yet, his admiration for art was far from gone. In fact, even in 1939, just before World War II broke out, it was reported that Hitler told the British ambassador that he did not want to end his career as a politician. Hitler said, "I am an artist and not a politician. Once the Polish question is settled, I want to end my life as an artist." Hitler and other Nazi leaders understood the power of art and architecture as a means of spreading Nazi ideology across the world. Large-scale statues depicting muscular, robust men were popular under the Third Reich because they were meant to demonstrate the supremacy of the German people and the Aryan race. In Germany, most things related to Nazism, such as swastikas, are forbidden and banned. Certain objects are allowed, such as uniforms and books, but only in accordance with stringent guidelines and under very specific conditions. This is because these artifacts have significant historical or factual significance. And what about artworks that were commissioned by the Nazis? How about artworks ordered by Hitler himself? Finally, what about Hitler's personal paintings? In Germany, it is possible to buy and sell works of art of this sort. Nevertheless, the transaction may only take place lawfully if it can be proven that the pieces were not plundered or stolen. This means that Hitler's artworks are acceptable. In spite of this, there is a well-hidden black market in Germany for Nazi art as well as for Nazi accessories. The market exists for the simple reason that one could get into trouble if it were discovered that they had an affinity for symbols that were used to justify the deaths of 17 million people. But, for instance, in the United States, these things, for some reason, are not forbidden.